Good afternoon, everyone present here and those who are joining online. On behalf of GIDS Institute of Development Studies, our faculty, staff, students, and on my own behalf, I welcome you all to our GIDS Institute lecture series. We are having multiple number of lecture series. We are celebrating our Golden Jubilee, so we have a monthly Golden Jubilee lecture series. We will be having on 15th of this month the 6th Golden Jubilee lecture, and we also have Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav series. We have our GIDS lecture series. Also, there is a webinar lecture series. So GIDS lecture series is basically, we have kept it open for anyone who is visiting GIDS, and at a short notice we can keep a lecture if somebody is here and wants to deliver a lecture which is of interest of the people. So we, on the short notice also, we just keep this lecture. I have with me Dr. Surjit Das from CSP, Center for Economic Studies and Planning, GNU, and he has been here for this week. So we just met on Monday, and in our talk, we figured out that he is expert on state finances, the public finance, the area which is very much of interest of everyone. Now we have the budget time. We had the union budget, and this week only we had state budget also presently. And we are talking of elections, coming elections. So in such a time, how the state finances they can be managed, and what is the role it can play for human development. So this is a topic we thought of having Surjit's lecture here. I welcome Surjit to deliver this lecture, and I welcome you all also to join regularly on our monthly lecture series of Golden Jubilee. This month, in the middle of the month, we will be having another lecture, Golden Jubilee monthly lecture series. So I welcome you all. I introduce my faculty here and our research staff to all of you. My colleague Shilshika is also there online. So we have our faculty present online and offline also. Now I request Dr. Manjur just give a brief introduction of Dr. Surjit Das before Surjit starts his lecture.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. And I also would like to welcome Dr. Surjit Das, who is teaching at the Center for Economic Studies and Planning, CSP, School of Social Sciences, JNU, since April 2013. And he has done his MPhil, PhD, MA, all from Jawaharlal Nehru University. His PhD is in economics from the same center, School of Social Sciences, Jawaharlal Nehru University. And the thesis topic was macroeconomic policy under regime of free capital flow. And along with that, he has published a large number of articles in national and international journal, which I'm not going to read out basically. But his work experiences, I would like to mention that he was teaching. He has completed 3 projects, basically macroeconomic impact of fiscal deficit and public debt funded by UGC under university with potential for excellence funding. He was with State Finance of Delhi, funded by Delhi Finance Commission. This is another project that he has completed. And he has also worked with the State Planning Board, Kerala. He has also taught economics at Ambedkar University, Delhi. And he was teaching money, banking, and finance there. He has also worked at National Institute of Public Finance and Policies for last, from 2007 to 2012. So with this brief introduction, I request Dr. Sujit Das to bring his presentation to us. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Should I go there?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, at the outset,
The presentation is visible.
Yes, it is.
yeah, at the outset, I must thank Director Professor Pramod Kumarji. We met just on this Monday, and I was wondering whether I can make a presentation on law. And he was readily agreed to this, very academic kind of. And I am told that he is also from JNU, so I mean, that is also another, reason of, being, closely associated. I mean, I am interested. Manjur is my friend. Manjur is always here, and I am interested to collaborate in future if there is any. I mean, given my expertise in economics and state finance, all these, I know GIDS Institute is concentrating on many other things. It is interdisciplinary research center, but at the same time, if I can contribute little bit, given my whatever little I know, I will be more than happy. So with this, let me begin my presentation today. It's So the topic of discussion today is on fiscal space for human development in India. I mean, we all know that human development gaps are wide in India. It's a very big country, and requirements are huge. I mean, almost all of us agree that if our governments could spend little more on education and health and infrastructure and so on, it would have been better. But from fiscal policy point of view, or from the point of view of macroeconomic stability and so on, people argue that there is hardly any fiscal space given the revenue receipt that the government, by government I mean central government and state governments taken together. So it's a combined government, general government. So there is lack of fiscal space. It's not that there is no political will to increase expenditure on health, education and infrastructure, but most of the time there is no money for the government to spend extra on health, education and so on. So this is a big question in public finance, particularly in a developing country like India, that how to find fiscal space, little more fiscal space in order to spend little more, given the priorities of the government, in order to spend little more on the social sector for human development and so on. So I began, that is the motivation of this paper. I began with this question. Since last year, there was this G20 meetings were happening in India. We had the presidency. So what I have done is I tried to plot. In fact, in one of the meetings, Manjur was also there in Delhi. I was presenting this, that if we compare the government expenditure on health as percentage of GDP for the G20 countries, there are 19 bar diagrams. One country is missing because data was not available. We can see that the health expenditure, this is not including water supply and sanitation. We have health expenditure, generally health and family welfare, which includes the expenditure on water supply and sanitation. But if we exclude that, purely on health, in India, including central and state government, we spend just about 1% of GDP. And including water supply and sanitation, it would be something around 1.3% of GDP, which is the government expenditure on health. And in Germany and United States and Japan and France and United Kingdom, you can see they spend something around more than 9% of GDP.
The slides are not moving.
He is not moving slide.
He is still on first slide.
You see this government expenditure on health slide?
No.
You are not seeing.
अच्छा विजय थोड़ा देखिए क्या कर रहे हैं?
Now,
It is only the first slide on fiscal space for human development in India, the title page.
So did
Okay.
you move to
They were
leave the PowerPoint, I think then it will move.
now
Now you can see?
Yes, it is visible
Yeah.
now.
Yes, yes.
You move
Last
away
time
from the
also this
PowerPoint
happened,
mode,
sir.
then it is visible.
Okay.
But then you can see this is a little.
No, it's okay.
Is this okay?
I think it's visible. Yeah.
All right. So roughly how much time do I have?
40 minutes.
Oh, 40 minutes. Okay. So now, as we can see, the developed world is spending much more. Their government expenditure on health as proportion of GDP is above 9%, whereas in India it is just about 1% of GDP. And if we look at, this is from the World Development Indicators 2021, World Bank. If we look at the major country groups around the world, I mean covering the entire world, if we see OECD member countries and European Union, of course, the health expenditure as proportion of GDP is above 7%, almost around 8% on an average. This is the average, this data is little dated, this is the average between 2016 and 2018. So this is the 3 years average of 2016, 17 and 18.
India is
However,
1%.
and India, if we see, it's just about 1%. The last but one, the last series I think is the South Asian average, which is basically not only India, is Bangladesh, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Nepal, our neighboring countries are also, I mean, in this part of the world, basically, the expenditure, government expenditure on health as proportion of GDP is extremely low as compared to the rest of the world. If we look at the average, more or less, on an average, countries are spending 3% of GDP on health. Whereas in India, if you remember in 2004, we resolved in National Common Minimum Program that we should also increase our health expenditure to GDP ratio from 1% to around 3%. However, even now it is around 1%. So, yeah, if we look at the expenditure on education, again for the G20 countries, we can see that, by the way, Saudi Arabia recently is spending huge money on education. That is one exception. Earlier, this was not the case. However, even within G20 countries, developing countries like Brazil and South Africa, they are spending something around 6% of GDP on education. Whereas in India, it is less than 3% of GDP, 2.85% of GDP, including central government and state government's expenditure, including local bodies also, because local bodies expenditure is also coming either from state exchange or from central. So, and again, if we look at the, so as far as G20 countries are concerned, be it health, be it education, we spend, I mean, our government expenditure as proportion to GDP is one of the lowest. And again, if we look at the major countries around the world, there also we see that developed countries are of course spending something around 5% of GDP on education. However, here, as we have noticed, we are spending something around 2.85% of GDP in India. And on an average, countries are spending at least 4% of GDP, more than 4.5% of GDP on education. So, I mean, here, spending on education and in general spending on social sector as proportion of GDP is extremely low. However, I mean, when we consider budget, etc., we try to see whether relative to last year, whether there has been some improvement or not, or whether as proportion of GDP or in per capita terms in constant prices, whether there has been some increase or not. That is important to compare, but at the same time, we have to keep in mind that relative to almost all countries around the world, in this part of the world, the social sector spending by the government is extremely low. And as a result of that, out-of-pocket expenditure is high. I mean, I was doing one work with Indranil of OP Jindal University. He works on health. So there we have taken global data on out-of-pocket expenditure on health. Obviously, there is a very high degree of negative correlation between government spending on health and people's out-of-pocket expenditure on health. So naturally, I mean, it's not unexpected, but that is why it is, not difficult to understand that why in this part of the world, out-of-pocket expenditure on health and education of the common people is so high as compared to the rest of the world. Now, these of course has direct implications for the human development. And if we plot human development index of same G20 countries and health expenditure and education expenditure, if we club them together, so health plus education expenditure divided by GDP and the human development index of 2021 of these G20 countries, and if we plot them, the second column HDI of 21 and the last column, that is health and education expenditure as proportion of GDP in a scatter diagram, we get this. So here clearly there is a very close positive relationship between government health expenditure and education expenditure as proportion of GDP, which has been plotted along the horizontal line, and human development index has been plotted along the vertical axis. So, and I have plotted all the countries. Of course, the red dot is India. As we have already seen, the education and health expenditure as proportion of GDP is extremely low in this country. And human development index wise also, this stands the lowest. So, and if we plot all other countries, and we can draw one linear trend also, but I have drawn one non-linear logarithmic trend because it is better fit. The R square is 68%, 69%, almost 70%. So, instead of running a regression, basically long linear regression, so that everybody can understand, I have simply plotted a scattered diagram and to show that there is a clear positive relationship between government expenditure on health and education and the human development index of the countries. Now, we have plotted this not only for G20 countries, for countries all over the globe also, and we get similar kind of result. Maybe the coefficients are little different, but R square is again 0.70% and above. And if we put some regional dummies, particularly continent specific dummies for African countries and European countries and so on, then the R square goes up to around 90%. So government expenditure on social sector and the human development index are very closely associated, positively associated all over the globe as far as empirical evidence is concerned. This data is taken from World Development Indicators of World Bank and UNDP. The HDI has been taken from UNDP. Okay. Now, we have already got two basic points. One is that health and education expenditure is important, government health and education expenditure is important for human development. And second is government expenditure on health and education is extremely low in this world. Now, if we have to look for fiscal space to spend little more on health and education, by the way, I should mention probably that when we passed our NCMP in 2004, I think UPA 1 government time. Before that, I was looking at the data. The government health expenditure of China was also around 1% of GDP during 99-2000. Now they have increased it to more than 3% of GDP, and we are still there at 1% of GDP. So, China is actually putting a lot of emphasis on social sector, health, education. And I'm not going into all those debates that which is doing what politically, etc., the degree of democracy, etc. But as far as human development index is concerned, China is also a large country with 140 crore people. So they have got very significant achievements vis-a-vis human development indicators. Now, some people say that data is problematic or unreliable, etc. But any big data is has their limitations. Even international organizations are reporting very good results for Chinese indicators for human development. So I think, it is supporting our hypothesis that government spending on social sector is important for human development. Fiscal deficit, yeah, if we plot the fiscal deficit of fiscal deficit of India and primary deficit of India, the interest payment component, which I want to draw your attention to, interest payment component. Interest payment means government is borrowing every year, so debt is being accumulated, and on the existing debt, government has to pay some interest. So that interest payment component is the difference between fiscal deficit and primary deficit. Those who are not from economics background for them. So if we look at this difference, then this difference is plotted by this thick plain black line. So that is going up continuously in India. It has from less than 3% of GDP in early 90s, now it has gone up to almost 5% of GDP in 2021 budget estimate. If we look at the combined government expenditure on education, health, interest payment and capital expenditure, just for the sake of comparison, for India, 1919, this is combined again, central plus state governments taken together. So interest payment is the dashed line on the top, which has crossed 6% once, and now it is around 5% of GDP. If we look at the government education expenditure and health expenditure, that is around 2.85% of GDP and 1% of GDP, so 3.85% to 4% of GDP, which is lower than the interest payment component. Even if we look at the capital expenditure of government, including central government capital expenditure and state government capital expenditure, that is also in most of the years, that is also lower than the interest payment component. So our interest payment component is higher than the total health education expenditure of the central and state governments in India, and also higher than the total capital expenditure of government in India. So this is really big component, and this is taking away almost 15 to 20% of total budget. 1/5 of the total government expenditure is going behind this interest payment component. So our primary deficit, that is fiscal deficit minus interest payment, is not that high. But our fiscal deficit is very high because of this 5% of GDP amount of interest payment component. If total, according to FRBM Act, if the fiscal deficit limit is around 6% of GDP or 5.5%, let's say, for states 3% of GSDP and for center 3% of GDP, so around 5.5 to 5.6% of GDP, out of that 5% is interest payment component. So primary deficit is hardly 0.5% or its budget that we are actually arguing for.
Can you just highlight what are the components of primary deficit, which is not accounted in the interest?
Yeah, primary deficit is
So that our viewer from the internet also.
So primary deficit is basically total expenditure of government, that is revenue expenditure plus capital expenditure, including interest payment. Interest payment comes under revenue expenditure. So revenue expenditure including interest payment plus capital expenditure minus revenue receipt, tax and non-tax revenue receipts, minus NDCR, non-debt capital receipt, which is disinvestment. So that is the definition of fiscal deficit. If we deduct interest payment component from there, we get primary deficit.
Okay.
So
That's the real deficit. Because interest we are paying because we have
for debt
borrowed in the
services.
past.
Yes,
We would not have borrowed in the past, then they would be same.
exactly. Is there any other question at this point?
Just for the clarification for
Sure.
non-economic students.
So, okay, so our interest payment component is really high. Now, if we look at the 43 advanced countries average worldwide, this data I have taken from IMF, fiscal monitor data, October 2022. For average of 43 advanced economies, 95 emerging market and middle income economies, and 58 low income developing economies.
What he has said, he is giving the figure in terms of percentage of GDP.
Yeah, I know.
If we take the percentage of total budget expenditure,
It
then
will be higher.
this will be around 50-60%.
15 to 20% of the combined budget of center and state.
States.
Yeah. If you take in
Yes, so 1/5 of the budget is going away only because of this.
only because.
So if we, if we look at the interest payment as a percentage of GDP of India, which is the above thick line, and the averages of 43 advanced countries, 95 emerging market economies, and 58 low income developing countries, we see that all their interest rates are lying between 1 and 2% of GDP. And in case of India, it is 5% of GDP. So, and if we notice that it has started, the rise has started from 1997 onwards. Before that, I mean, the interest payment component as a percentage of GDP of India was more or less comparable with that of the rest of the world. But it has started rising from 98 onwards, after 1997. So I want to highlight this because something was done in 1997, because of which I would like to argue that this has happened. So, and then the gap is quite wide now. And when we say that here it is 5% of GDP and there it is 1.5 or 2% of GDP. So 3% of GDP means something around our 1% of GDP means around 3 lakh crore rupees. So 3% of GDP means 9 lakh crore rupees. So it's a hell lot of money. I mean, if we can divert it, at least part of it towards education and health, it would be a big thing.
4 trillion means we are around 320 lakh crore. Our GDP.
Expected, this,
Our GDP
24,
size.
yes. So 24-25 expected GDP, but as of now it is around 3 lakh crore rupees. So 3 crore rupees is the GDP, 3 lakh crore rupees is roughly 1% of GDP. So 3% of GDP means 9 lakh crore, 9 to 9.5, 10 lakh crore rupees. Okay. Now, yeah, so
And our union budget size itself is 45.
45.
yes,
Just imagine
yes.
this part of it.
Yes, yes. So that is the fiscal space I am talking about, which might be available to us if we do certain changes. So what is to be done, etc., how to find out empirically. So, yes.
Sometimes government adjust fiscal deficit, right? Sometimes they adjust fiscal deficit.
Yes,
They announce in governments.
yes.
Is that reflecting in previous slide?
This one,
Ah.
this is the interest payment.
No, these are the interest payment. What I'm saying is sometimes the government announce that they adjust the fiscal deficit
How do they?
by cutting some subsidies.
Yeah, by bringing down
So,
government
yeah,
expenses, yes.
Is that reflecting in this?
Of course, this is exposed after all the adjustments. This is actual data.
Oh.
What has happened? Yeah, so yes, what Sir was saying, that instead of taking as proportion of GDP, if we take as total government expenditure, then also we see the same picture. That in case of India, almost more than 16% of GDP, the upper above thick line, more than 16% of GDP is the interest payment component, and that is and sometimes it has touched 18%, crossed 18% of GDP also, now it's around that. And for developing and underdeveloped countries, average, it is 6 to 8% of GDP. During COVID, it has touched, I think, 10% of GDP for the underdeveloped, for the, I guess it is the emerging market economies. However, more or less, it was around 8%, less than 8% of GDP, 6 to 8% of GDP. 6 to 8% of total government expenditure was the interest payment component for most of the countries on an average. In our country, it is around 16%, 16 to 18% of total government expenditure. So that's the fiscal space I'm talking about. Now, why is this so high? Why is this so high? In developed world, the interest rate is relatively less on an average as compared to the developing countries. But in developed world, the debt is very high as proportion of GDP. So debt to GDP ratio is more than 100% for most of the, on an average, for these 43 advanced economies, the debt to GDP ratio is more than 120%. And in India, it is around 80% or so as of now. But we are arguing that it is very high, etc. But it is much less than the advanced economies. However, their debt to GDP ratio is high, but their interest rate is low. That is why their interest payment component is low. In underdeveloped economies, debt to GDP ratio is not that high, but their interest rates are higher. So as a result of that, the effective interest rate on government bond is higher. And that is why, but including that also, they are spending hardly 1 to 2% of GDP. And we are spending here 7 to 8, we are spending here 5% of GDP on interest payment component.
Just like we see in agriculture.
Yes.
If we are taking loan from government,
Yeah.
say 12%, 10%. Now it is less than 3%.
Yes.
Under the cooperative societies and all that.
Right.
But if you take from money lender, it is 36, 72%.
Correct.
Probably in India, where
There are money
government
lenders,
is
yes.
borrowing from money lenders.
Yes.
Whereas those countries, they borrow from the government, all those government banks or whatever government securities.
Yes. So since you requested that day, I have made one slide on UP also. We'll come to UP case. Here, so our effective interest rate on public debt, 1991 to 2020, has been plotted here. Can you take line again? So our interest rate, effective interest rate, by effective interest rate, I mean, government is borrowing from various sources, but whatever be the total government debt and whatever is the interest payment component, if we take interest payment component as percentage of total debt, that is the effective interest rate that government is paying. So that way it has been calculated indirectly. So our effective interest rate is around 7% of GDP in 2000, before lockdown. In 2018, up to 2018-19, it is around 7%, almost 7% of GDP. So that is the effective interest rate, including all sources. Some sources are cheaper than other sources.
Much higher than the public deposit rate. Deposit rate is hardly 4%.
Yes, it is much higher, but I'll come in a moment. Let me just complete this argument that the effective interest rate for UP is more than 7%. I'll just show in a moment. This is the UP chart that I have prepared today morning. That is, I have taken data from Reserve Bank of India, this state finances a study of budgets for 2021-22, 22-23 and 23-24. Uttar Pradesh government is paying interest at a rate of 7.14, 7.08, 7.25%. The upper layer. So that is the effective interest rate for the Uttar Pradesh government, which government is actually paying. And as a proportion of GSDP, the debt to GSDP ratio for Uttar Pradesh state government of Uttar Pradesh is above around 2%, 2.17, 2.03, 1.9, so 2%. So 2% of GSDP is the debt amount, and fortunately Uttar Pradesh budget size is much higher. So as a proportion of total government expenditure, it is related, it's around 10%. But there are states where it is around 20%. I know Kerala story. Kerala it is 20%. Because they are, yes. So there are many states where it is around 20%. But here it is around 10% as proportion of total budget.
No, this 2% is debt or
Debt to
interest payment?
GSDP ratio.
How much is interest payment?
That is effective. 7.2.
Effective interest.
No, I'm sorry, this is interest payment. I'm sorry, yes, you are right.
Not the debt.
No, not the debt. This is the interest payment component,
Yes.
which UP government is paying as proportion of GSDP.
Debt will be much higher.
Debt is 30%, 30%. And they are paying interest at a rate.
Kerala interest payment is 20%.
Interest payment is 20%.
Yeah.
20% of total government expenditure.
Yes.
Since government expenditure is higher in Uttar Pradesh, that is why this 2% of GSDP amount of interest payment would be around 10% of total government expenditure for the state government of Uttar Pradesh. But so it is 1/10 of the budget, but for Kerala it is 1/5 of the budget.
Yeah.
For the central government it is around 1/5 of the budget. Union government. So yeah. Now here I was talking about this, that in 1997 what happened. In 90, I used to work with Professor Rangarajan. I was his research assistant in 12th Finance Commission long back. So he told me this story, and then I retrieved it from one of those RBI office orders. In 1997, when he was governor of Reserve Bank of India, and when Montek Singh Ahluwalia was economic advisor, Minister of Finance, there was a MOU signed between RBI and the Ministry of Finance, saying that this today's agreement signed between the Government of India and the Reserve Bank of India puts an end to the 4-decade-old system of ad hoc treasury bills to finance central government deficit. The ad hocs, which found its way as an innocuous administrative arrangement for convenience. Basically, what used to happen is whatever is your fiscal deficit, that would be automatically monetized. That was the system earlier. So they put to an end of that particular system, and to convenience, to enable the government to maintain its cash balance to a required minimum level, assumed in course of time a larger than life proportion posing a threat to monetary stability and curtailing the Reserve Bank's freedom of operating instrument of monetary policy for price stability. That is basically RBI. There was a discussion about the autonomy of the central bank. So RBI should be given full autonomy vis-a-vis the inflation targeting policy. If RBI has to control inflation, then they should have control on the aggregate money supply. And if automatic monetization keeps happening, that is whatever government spending exceeding government's total revenue, that is the deficit, that is being monetized, so that is added to the aggregate money supply. And if that is automatically added to the aggregate money supply, then obviously money supply would not be under the control of the Reserve Bank of India. So they signed this MOU. By this MOU, they stopped monetization. What is monetization? That is government borrowing from the Reserve Bank of India. So government directly cannot borrow from Reserve Bank of India after 1997.
No.
Sorry.
But in the past,
Yes.
3 RBI that who is the head, the governor of RBI.
Yes.
They have been changed because they refuse to give direct access to the government. Some of those money for election purpose, for other things. That is what informally we know.
Yes,
Not-
so RBI profit was whether government can appropriate RBI
That is,
profit or
that is
not.
part of the profit, not the monetization.
Not monetization. Monetization.
That is the difference.
Monetization is RBI would directly hold government bonds. So RBI would purchase the government bonds in the primary market.
The part with the profit, not with this.
Yes, profit appropriation, yes, was the controversial issue in India. Yes. But
There
vis-a-vis
is
this,
no as such rule, what happens to the profit. RBI.
it is a gray area. Because if we believe that RBI also part of the government,
Hmm.
then RBI's profit,
Yeah.
like other PSUs, government can appropriate.
Yeah.
If RBI makes loss, then government has to subsidize.
Hmm.
But RBI governor was skeptical that whether it's not clearly mentioned anywhere in the constitution that how to utilize this RBI's profit. Now, whether in crisis government can take it or not, I don't know. I am not very sure about it. But of course, there are arguments and counter arguments. One has to look into it.
Now having a bureaucrat, it is much easier than previously when there is a academician sitting there.
Surajit, one small query.
Yeah.
Did government take money from RBI during or after demonetization?
Yes, government took that. Government appropriated the profit. That is why this controversy arose. That then government said that RBI is also part of the government. So if RBI is making some, there is some surplus, why can't we utilize it for incurring some expenditure instead of borrowing it from the market at 7% rate of interest? We can appropriate and use this.
This was the controversy with Urjit Patel and
Yes.
Raghu left because of this.
Because of this controversy.
So here, the monetization was stopped. And earlier government used to borrow from RBI at around 2% rate of interest. And market rate of interest has become more than 8%. So if, in the government bond market,
Something went wrong.
हेलो कोई आवाज नहीं आ रही है
हाँ,
इनके वहाँ
कुछ
पे network में problem.
टेक्निकल एरर हुआ है कुछ।
ये इंस्टीट्यूट से प्रॉब्लम है या सुरजीत के एंड पे कुछ प्रॉब्लम आई है
I think इंस्टीट्यूट से प्रॉब्लम है ना, वहां से कुछ आवाज नहीं आ रही।
ओ बाकी लोग आपस में बात कर सकते हैं
हाँ, हम लोग ऑनलाइन।
हम लोग
क्यों ना
ऑनलाइन
हम-
बात कर रहे हैं।
हाँ तो
तो
क्यों
फिर
ना हम
ऑनलाइन
लोग
तो उनका
वेबिनार
भी आना चाहिए, उनका भी आना चाहिए था ना सुरजीत जी का भी,
नहीं
बट
आ रहा
उनका भी नहीं आ रहा है,
हाँ उनका भी नहीं आ रहा तो हम ही लोग बचे
नहीं आ रहा है।
सारी क्वेरी तो इन्होंने बीच में ही कर ली, इनको भी इतना पेशेंस नहीं है कि लेक्चर ही खत्म होने देते।
अच्छा थोड़ा
नहीं वो टेबल के साथ कई बार लगता है ना, जब टेबल शो कर रहे हैं कि ये इशू है, कई बार रहता है कि फिर वो ओवरसाइट हो जाता है। मैं भी इसीलिए पूछ रही थी।
अब तो हमारा लेक्चर ही है ना।
हमारा म्यूट हो रखा है सर। Now can you hear?
hello,
Hello?
हाँ सर आ रहा है आवाज
ठीक है।
Probably it's not muted actually.
आप लोग की सारी बातें सुनाई दे गई हैं इधर।
internet connectivity.
No, we
हाँ वो बीच में था, वो अभी घूम रहा था ना इसमें।
hear you, but you could not hear us.
Okay.
Is it audible now?
यस
Yes,
सर
sir.
यस सर
यस।
In the PPT,
So what I was saying, we are raising this because this lecture is meant for interactive session.
Yes.
You should have joined us physically, not online, but you bear with it. So what I was asking,
स्लाइड ज्यादा क्लियर है, इसमें अच्छे से डेटा दिख रहा है, वहां से कुछ दिखता नहीं है।
Yeah.
okay, if you are comfortable, no problem. What I was asking Surajit, that before 97, whatever government fiscal deficit was monetized by RBI. So after 97, government is forced to borrow from the market, not from the RBI. That leaves RBI with huge amount to just lend to the market. So naturally their profits have gone up,
Yeah.
isn't it? And
Yeah, RBI accumulated a lot of foreign exchange reserves
hmm,
in order to control the exchange rate.
hmm,
I mean, in 2003 onwards, up to 2008 financial crisis of the US, during the high growth period, we have received a very high amount of foreign investment.
hmm,
Foreign capital inflow took place. And during that time, it was putting a pressure on the exchange rate. Our exchange rate was tending to appreciate.
Yeah.
And if exchange rate appreciates, then exporters would be losing out and importers would be gaining. So import would go up, export would come down. As a result of that, there would be deindustrialization, our GDP growth would come down and so on. In order to stop that, what RBI does, RBI buys a lot of foreign exchange from the market, foreign exchange, domestic market,
Yes.
to create an artificial crisis so that the price of the foreign exchange dollar in terms of domestic rupee does not come down, does not fall. So that currency does not appreciate. And in this process, when RBI is buying a lot of dollars from the market, the foreign exchange reserve gets accumulated. Now also we have got $600 billion of foreign exchange reserve, which is around more than 20% of our GDP. It's huge money.
Yeah.
Now, how much is safe? People say that if you have 3 months import bill plus some more amount foreign exchange for the possible hot money outflows, that is from the share market, money can flow out and so on. So even if we consider 3 months import bill, which would be around 2.5% of GDP and to 3% of GDP.
Yeah.
And if you add 3% more of GDP, that is 6% of GDP. So there is whole 20% amount of foreign exchange reserve. RBI is also lending it.
Please mute yourself. Those who are online, please mute.
No, मेरा mute हो जाएगा तो सुनाई नहीं देगा।
नहीं तुम्हारा Okay, please go.
Continue.
नहीं कर लिया म्यूट कर लिया
तो लोग कर लिया उन्होंने, छोड़ दो.
सर छोड़ दीजिए
छोड़ ही दिया. Okay. So RBI so RBI is making investment of that foreign exchange reserve in various ways. However, I was calculating the average annual rate of return on RBI's investment is merely 2.1% per annum. So RBI would be happy to lend government at any rate more than 2%. And government is borrowing at 7%, 8% from the market. Because borrowing from RBI, direct borrowing from RBI has been stopped.
So RBI is not lending to the private open market.
RBI can lend to the commercial banks, I mean at repo rate, but that is, yes.
But
RBI
that is also
making investment of the foreign exchange that they have, which has been accumulated as a part of exchange rate policy. However, rate of return on that is very low. So RBI would be happy to get any percentage higher than 2.1% per annum. And government would also be benefited if government can borrow from RBI, if government is allowed to borrow from RBI rather than borrowing from the market. So now, okay.
And what about the foreign exchange, which is RBI keeps? It does not earn anything to RBI?
Yes, it earns 2.1%.
The same. Okay.
I mean, on an average, RBI's investment and rate of return, I was calculating the effective interest rate on RBI's investment, it is roughly 2.1% per annum. So RBI is not earning much. If RBI...
What is the reason?
No, because RBI is not lending to the investors, not directly. RBI either at repo rate, RBI can give money to the commercial banks.
But that will raise the inflation.
No, but RBI is not lending because there is no demand. In the credit market, the credit deposit ratio did not, even after announcement of Atmanirbhar Bharat Abhiyan package, etc., the credit deposit ratio is still low. And that is one of the biggest problem Professor Ashima Goel, many others are raising, that investment GDP ratio is not picking up. Our credit deposit ratio in all commercial banks taken together is very low. So they have a lot of space to provide more credit, but there is no demand for credit. Even after Atmanirbhar Bharat Abhiyan package, what has happened? Collateral free loans with government guarantee at relatively easier term, lower rate of interest has been provided. What people have done, they have accessed this easy loans, but they have replaced, they didn't increase their aggregate investment because market is down. Replace some of their past loans with these easy loans. And obviously, because this is profitable. Now, until and unless aggregate demand situation improves, I mean, they can't take business, until and unless business confidence is high, they can't take risk of investing more when their already existing capacity is underutilized. I mean, until and unless investment GDP ratio is picking up, it is unlikely that credit deposit ratio would pick up and commercial banks would take a lot of loans from the RBI. So RBI is making investment of its foreign exchange reserve to some foreign countries for something, or if some investors are asking for foreign, loan in terms of foreign currency, then they may give. But rate of return on those loans is extremely low.
that will be.
Yes. Now, I am not saying that RBI has to give government loans in terms of foreign exchange. What I am trying to suggest is that, okay, before that, let us have a look at the composition of, government bond holdings. Who holds the government bond? As I was talking about this 97 policy. In fact, 2018 FRBM review committee under N.K. Singh, they understood this problem and they recommended that this committee that occasionally government should be allowed to take loans from the RBI or some partial monetization can be allowed. Even Professor Rangarajan himself, after COVID lockdown in 2021 on record, has said that occasional monetization should be probably allowed. So in 1997, the situation was very different. That is, whatever was extra government expenditure, automatically it would be monetized. Now, since they completely stopped it, the effective interest rate on government bond went up, and which is taking away 5% of GDP amount of fiscal space, or almost 16 to 20% of total exchange is going behind that interest payment component as a result of
That even adds to the fiscal deficit for the next year.
Yes, almost entire fiscal deficit is, that's what I was trying to say. If we go by FRBM not, if our cumulative fiscal deficit is 5.6%, and if 5% is the interest payment component, almost entire fiscal deficit is basically going behind debt services. It is not going behind boosting aggregate demand or social sector spending and so on.
So then government can invest also more if the interest rate comes down.
Exactly, on capital expenditure, on social sector expenditure, wherever, depending on the priority. So these guys are holding the government papers.
Okay.
If we look at ownership of central and state government securities in India as of
Insurance company 30%.
March 2022, 23 data is also there, but it is not much different. I mean, composition remains more or less the same. So we still have, RBI still holds around 10 to 11% of government securities in their vault. They are old securities. And yeah, should I continue?
Please.
Okay. Yeah, 9% comes from provident funds and PF and all these things. 10% of the government papers are held by corporates and 40%, 25 plus 50, 40% of it is held by the commercial banks. 25% of them are nationalized commercial banks and cooperatives and RRBs, and 15% is held by private commercial and foreign commercial banks. Foreign banks operating in India are holding huge amount of government securities. So, and then the entire the advantage of high interest support of 7 to 8%, which is assured return. I mean, with the credit rating of government is A++, so it cannot default. So with full guarantee 7 to 8% rate of return is of course providing some support to the viability of this banking sector. However, not only private public banks but also private banks and foreign banks are getting benefit of it. And 30% is held by the insurance companies operating in India. So 30 plus 40, 70% of the government securities are held either by the commercial banks. Even nationalized commercial banks, more than 50% of them have been privatized. Their shares are not there. So why commercial banks should be given interest subsidy is something which has to be, I think, rethought about. Corporate sector is holding 10%. So PF, PPF I can understand for some kind of social security, old age security. RBI is still holding 11%, so together 20%. Rest 80% of the government papers are being held either by the corporates or by the insurance companies or by the banks operating in India. So
Insurance, again, the private insurance also will be.
mostly private. Even LIC has been, the papers are on sale, and all others are basically private.
How much is LIC's share in this?
I will check that.
That one has to.
Yes.
One has to see.
Yes, I can check. However, whatever it is, I am saying insurance companies and commercial banks, they are operating commercially in the market.
Yeah.
And this, I am not saying that this is not an important support to the banking and insurance sector in the country, but this is happening at the cost of cutting down your health education expenditure or capital expenditure.
Ultimately.
So I mean, priorities. If this is the priority, then let us state that this is our priority. But if this is not, then we should be conscious about it. That's my point. If government is consciously providing this support to the commercial banks and the insurance companies and the corporate sector, that at least 7 to 8% rate of return is assured.
But question is, after 97,
Yes.
there might be some compulsions of the government. Now BJP government has full support and it is with so much power. Why they could not change this?
I don't think that these things change because of UPA or NDA or color of the coalition in power.
Because ultimately there is a huge money available for the government.
I think these are structural issues of this economy, and these are much deep-rooted problems. So we have to take conscious effort, whichever government is there in power, irrespective of that. If government is made conscious of this, that what I was suggesting is, as in informal discussion on that day, Monday also, I was saying that human development, health, education, these are primarily state subjects. More than 80% of the expenditures are incurred by the state governments. So if state exchequer is in tight situation, then human development gets affected in the country. Now, therefore, I was suggesting that this space, I mean, I was obviously suggesting debt restructuring, that some of the debt, I mean, government can borrow from RBI at lower rate of interest and repay some of the old past debts to these guys, and that way restructure the debt. It would not happen overnight at one go, but slowly, if that is the direction in which we work, then interest payment burden can come down substantially, which is free a lot of fiscal space for health, education, infrastructure, and so on. Now, the state governments should be allowed to borrow directly from the Reserve Bank of India. Because state exchequers are in extremely tight situation and states do not have too many options. If they have to go for borrowing, whatever 3.5% of their GSDP, there are 2-3 channels. They have to borrow through RBI only. Reserve Bank of India, this debt management office conducts the debt management operations. And we say that it is kind of free market, the rate of interest is market determined, but actually it is not. Again, I am going to RBI in March most likely to inquire. As far as my research is concerned, I have seen that the way it is actually conducted through these primary dealers, there is a kind of unwritten understanding between the primary dealers and the Reserve Bank of India that whatever government securities are floated, if the rate of return is 8%, then government security 100 rupees worth of government securities would be sold at 92 rupees, assuring 8% return. And so this is fixed. This is not market determined. This does not depend on demand supply. Obviously, there will be high demand for government securities all the time because there is 8% rate of return, which is absolutely risk-free. So yes, so as I was saying that deposit rate is much lower as compared to that. If they say and lending operation is risky because even the big businessmen are defaulting and there are many NPAs being accumulated in the banks. So banks would always try to play safe if there are options of government security. Therefore, demand for government security does not come down. Even Calcutta-based economist Professor Mihir Rakshit argued that until and unless people lose faith on the piece of paper called money, there is no reason to believe that they would lose faith on the paper issued by the same authority called government bonds. The credit rating of government bonds do not fall. People have faith on government bonds because people have faith on currency notes. On top of that, currency notes don't fetch you any return, but government bonds fetch you 7 to 8% assured return. So it's a lucrative asset. There would not be any problem of demand for government securities, so to say. It is all set that how much rate of return should be given on the government bonds. So government bond markets, the way it is operating in India at least, my hunch is it is not market determined the way we read in textbooks through demand and supply. It is exogenously set from outside. It is more policy determined rather than being free. So if that is the case, then consciously we are assuring 8% rate of return to commercial banks and the insurance sector and the corporate sector for their viability. As a result of which our interest payment component is 5% of GDP or 15 to 20% of total government exchequer. As a result of that, we are spending way above what the whole world is spending. Be it developing country average, underdeveloped country average, or developed country average, it is around 1 to 2%, and we are spending 5%, more than 5% of GDP. So this 3% of GDP, 3.5% of GDP extra amount of space, which I was saying around 10 lakh crore rupees today. So huge money. So part of that can easily be channelized for social sector and maybe for capital expenditure and so on. Particularly when foreign investment is not picking up. It is not good enough for absorbing the existing labor force or to ensure, if not full employment, but at least near full employment situation. Government capital expenditure has to chip in to keep the aggregate demand up so that unemployment problem does not cross a limit. So, yeah. I would stop there. If there are questions, comments. This is work in progress. I have written it yet, but I am also thinking. So your comments and questions will be extremely useful. Thank you.
First, I would like to congratulate you.
You come here. I think
It was a good presentation, sir. And you really floated an idea to think about this topic, human development, in this perspective. One thing I would like to ask you, in the initial stage, you said that we can't say that there's no political will. Instead, we are short of money. This is what you said.
Yes.
But what do you have to say when government is so much spending on building temples and all? Don't you think that money should have been diverted toward education and medical?
Government money is not spent on.
Exactly. I
building
think-
this temple at least.
But they are spending so much. They are spending so much. Not building on temple, but so much in pop and shows they have spent. So
Actually, they are created infrastructure, but religious infrastructure in terms of the other social sector.
but neglecting
Yes.
medical and education.
Even Mamata Di is also following the same path. She has also invested a lot of money.
How
in
can you
building-
say that they are not?
The basic question is,
States are following nominal
facts of the matter, like if we see all the state governments, if recently we can put our finger on any state government which is trying to make a change. I don't know on reality whether the truth is same or not, but Delhi government, they have tried
Yes.
health and education, putting a very focus.
Yes.
But I don't know, outcome takes, because this is a long-term investment. It takes 20 years.
Yes.
The result will not be visible, and that is the reason. Spending on temple, you will get the result immediately within 3 months. Spending on education and health, it will take time. And
No, I
no
think-
government has time to wait for 20 years to get the result. And that is basically the problem of health on the human capital building, which probably is the only way a state can develop in the long run. The entire East Asian model, Singapore, South Korea, now China is spending, as you have said. I have one clarification.
Sure, sir.
Even the BJP has brought in the white paper yesterday on
Yesterday
the press
only,
con.
yeah.
And they have claimed, the big claim is that before 2014, the monetary policy was not being monitored. It was left open to the RBI, and whatever macro indicators, they'll work independently, and inflation always rules double digit. They have compared their inflation 5 to 6% to 8% Congress period. And the big credit is given to their monetary policy committee, which they have formed, which is given the task of keeping the inflation within
Single digit.
4 to 6%. That bracket they have given. So, what is your opinion? It's a monetary policy. I don't know. You will deal with that also or not.
Yeah, sure.
But is it possible? Like it seems, except COVID, other period was quite okay. To some extent, this committee has been successful to keep it within the limits. But can this, in the long run, be monitored and kept in that limit the way, I mean, macro indicators, they can go haywire.
Yes.
Can be where sometimes some of those indicators go to 20%. Suddenly, if there is a drought, agriculture is not, say, supply is abrupted. Food inflation will cross 20%, and then can the monetary policy, monetary committee can manage keeping inflation within limits in such a situation?
Sir, should I answer one by one, or how to do it? Or
As you wish.
Yeah, there are not-
yeah.
It can take, if there are many fingers, then we
Maybe I'll answer this, and then
then we can.
there is another set of questions. I mean, whatever be the priorities of the incumbent government of a country, according to their priorities, government is formed by people's representatives and so on. So whatever they decide, their spending pattern or composition of government expenditure would happen according to that. What I'm trying to do here is basically I'm trying to make it explicit that almost 5% of GDP amount of money is going to support, I mean, if not 5%, but at least 3.5 to 4% to support the corporate sector and the insurance companies and the commercial banks in India, which other countries are not doing. And rather they are using that fiscal space in order to spend more on social sector and infrastructure and so on. Now, if it is your priority, then fine. I mean, I am nobody to, this is government's job to do it. I can just suggest. What, according to me, the priority should be in a country like India, little less support to those sectors and little more support to the social sectors. That probably would make a positive change. Yes. And sir, regarding monetary policy, of course, government, whatever government is claiming, that's fine. But I have a different understanding of macroeconomics. In fact, there are a lot of questions. I don't believe in that monetarist kind of Friedman kind of framework. More money chases fewer goods, and that's why inflation happens. In fact, inflation happens in this country mainly because of two things. One is because of oil and food and fuel price increase, international food and fuel price increase. That is one biggest factor. The second factor is structural inflation because of the policy changes, because of the reduction in subsidy, because of the increase in taxes, because of all these things, inflation takes place. Now, if inflation is not demand pull inflation, then that cannot be controlled by monetary policy, by increasing repo rate. Because increasing repo rate would reduce demand by reducing the investment. When investment GDP ratio is falling, if you increase the repo rate in order to control inflation, then it would not be prudent, in my opinion. If it is demand pull inflation, then only this kind of. Now, what monetary policy committee does, monetary policy committee has been formed not only in this country, in 150 countries around the world. And almost all the central banks are following this inflation targeting policy using the Taylor's rule. I wrote a paper in EPW in 2018, I think. Can the central banks control inflation? And empirical data suggests that I took data out for 150 countries. That only in case of 9 countries, there are evidence that a rise in interest rate can reduce future inflation rates. And for out of 150 countries, only in 9 countries. There are 16 countries for which it increases future inflation rate because it pushes up the interest rate. Credit is one of the essential inputs of production. So if cost of credit goes up, then naturally cost push inflation would take place. So it can increase also.
Reduce supply and then causes increase.
So I think what MPC does is basically they don't control inflation. I believe in endogenous money supply. I believe that whatever would be the demand for money at aggregate level, money supply would be exactly equal to that, neither less nor more, always in a credit money world, Caldor kind of view. And money supply can never be in excess because until and unless money is demanded, money cannot be supplied. So how can money be in excess? Money cannot be in excess, unlike Friedman thought that excess money would chase fewer goods and cause inflation. So I don't believe in that. And most of the central banks, they are realizing that aggregate money supply is beyond their control. That is why they are shifting more towards interest rate instrument rather than SLR or CRR based quantitative controls. For the first time, European Central Bank is the only central bank which has announced officially that money supply is beyond our control. It is endogenous in nature. It is not exogenously set by the central bank. If it is not, then what are you doing in the name of inflation targeting policy? Basically, in my understanding, what they do, they try to make sure that the deposit rate nominal deposit rate does not go down below the inflation rate. Then the real deposit rate will become negative. Then there will be disincentive for saving. Then, so that they want to make sure the deposit rate does not go down too much. But by that process, whether inflation can be controlled or not, I have my doubts. Now this is going on Taylor's rule based system. People think that those who are not specialized in this field, they think that okay, even my mother was telling that inflation is happening, so interest rate might go up. I said, how do you know? Then she says, no, but that's what happens. Even in newspaper, people are writing that there's a possibility that so it has become a matter of common sense. But whether, I mean, I think we need to scrutinize our understanding of monetary economics, which is underlying the monetary policy again, because all these, even I don't know about RBI governors, but many modern monetary theory, this MMT, they are also saying similar things. In the literature of economics, now no serious macroeconomists believe in exogenous money supply. Almost nobody. But it will take probably some time to come into operation in the policy making circle. Because when these guys would become senior, they would become governors and so on, possibly, then there would be some change. However, I don't think it would have direct serious implication for the inflation, particularly under a demand constraint situation when aggregate demand is the problem, when people don't have enough purchasing power, when informal sector is so large. So there are a lot of absorption capacity for the economy. So extra income or extra money would not necessarily cause inflation in a demand constraint situation. That's my.
Then now we have also electronic money,
Yeah, exactly. That is anyway beyond your control.
much more difficult to control.
Paytm, ATM, all these. Yeah. So how do central banks control it? Whatever is the demand, that will be supplied.
Okay, one.
We have AK Singh ji with us. Do you have Singh Saab?
Now he's unmuting.
Yes.
Yeah. Unmute कर लीजिए.
Okay.
जी जी Surjit, I like the presentation. You have shown the situation regarding expenditure on health and education and the fiscal situation of the government.
Yes, sir.
But I feel that you are missing the central point because your theme was a fiscal space for expenditure on human development.
Right, sir.
And that is why I felt interested in attending this. But on that, I find very little has been said because you have taken the discussion to another line. What I feel is that you can look at it from in a static framework or in a dynamic framework. In a static framework, given the resources, from whatever sources they are coming to the government, it is a matter of priority to different sectors. So ultimately, how much goes to education, how much goes to health, it depends upon the priority of the government, center and the state.
Yes.
And there we find that there is a wide variation. Take the case of Kerala and UP. In 50s, the per capita income of two states were not much different. But Kerala was spending a much larger proportion of its budget on health and education as compared to UP. So which means that the political leadership there placed a higher value on human development as compared to UP. If you look at the per capita expenditure on social sectors, we find that the average of UP is 30% lower than the average of all states. It is not even 700 or 800 rupees per capita. whereas even the poorer states are spending much higher amount per capita on social sector. For example, in Jharkhand, per capita social expenditure is almost double of UP, although it is a much poorer state. So it is a matter of policy. If you look at the budget in a longer perspective, the size of budget has been expanding. UP budget has increased under present government from about 4 lakh crores to 7.3 lakh crores this year. Has expenditure on education and health has increased to that extent? Because you look at the incremental expenditure in different sectors. So we find that now much more is going to, say, so-called infrastructure sector, roads, expressways, and so on. Similarly, central government in last 2-3 years, it has increased the capital expenditure by, I think, almost 2 percentage point of GDP. So if it can increase expenditure on one side, it can increase expenditure on the other side. But it depends upon what the leadership thinks about these things. So this expenditure on expressways and infrastructure, I remember what Galbraith said, these are symbolic developments because they attract people that this expressway has been built up by us. They are visible to people, but improvement in health and education is not visible to common people. So government has a different outlook to these problems. What is needed is, as you have shown, that our education expenditure is 3% of GDP. Our goal was to increase it to 6%. Even 85 education policy says 6% should be spent. Health, we are spending about 1 or 1.5% only. So it should at least be doubled. So I think we have to find resources. 3% of GDP for education, additional resources, and 3% for health. Then we will come to the average of about 9%, which developed and other developing countries are achieving. So my second point is looking at in a dynamic framework that the resources will come from mobilization of financial resources and not through borrowing, which is an easy recourse to which government is resorting. Now you see what is our tax GDP ratio. It has remained between 10-11% for last 20 years. For the central government and about 7% for the state government as a whole. So our tax GDP ratio is only 17.5% at present. Even Brazil has a ratio of almost 30%. Developed countries, some European countries, and I think USA also, it is almost 40%. So there is a big scope of raising resources through non-borrowing sources, through user charges, and through direct taxes, which our politicians are hesitant to do. If there is no tax in the budget, everybody thinks the budget is very good. But the condition of the poor remains the same. So my central point is that it is the priority in the mind of the political leadership And if that changes, then resources are not a problem. But in which sector they should go, that has to be decided. So I was expecting you will be throwing light that where can we reduce expenditure and where, so that more resources are available for education. Even within the existing budget, so much saving can be done in several departments. And administrative wastage can be reduced to a great extent and more resources can be diverted. So
Sure.
this is my take on the situation.
Great response.
Thank you, Singh Saab. Before you respond, Surjit, we have written in Hindustan Times after our budget was presented in Uttar Pradesh. So we are seeing the total budget in health and education, especially. He's right. We have increased little amount of education, and surprisingly, I had written they have not highlighted that. Surprisingly, this year's budget amount for health in Uttar Pradesh is less than the last year's absolute amount.
Oh my God.
If you just add the inflation, it is much less than what was budgeted last year. In education, we have seen from 2017, 16, 17 onwards, the increase is also only symbolic, because in education there is increase of 2,000, 3,000 crore rupees. But when we see the budget amount and then a revised budget
And the
and
actual.
budget, in the revised it will be somewhat around 10-15% less, and then from revised budget to actual again 15% less. So total spent is almost 20 to 25% less than budgeted, almost last 3-4 budgets every time. So what they are budgeting is seen by the public, but what actually is spent, it doesn't come to the picture of the people. So this is how we treat education and health, and Uttar Pradesh probably needs to spend almost double compared to other states. It has to grow in the future.
Yes,
We can see the quality of education. We need to think about it.
absolutely.
Health, I think people, you talked of out of pocket expenditure. I think in India and poor states, especially poor states, 80-90% is from out of pocket. Not even 10% from the government comes.
Yeah.
So we have left them at their own peril. Who can survive, otherwise die. We are not least bothered. Okay, please go ahead.
Well,
Thank you, sir.
Let him answer the question, and then Senapati, then you come.
Thank you, sir. I completely agree. I'm sorry I could not make myself clear probably. What I was suggesting, as you were saying that we need more resources, let's say 3% of GDP amount of extra money for education, 1.5% of GDP extra money for health in this country. That means 4.5% of GDP. So I was suggesting that since we are spending 5% of GDP, which all other countries are spending less than 2%, 1.5%, we can possibly find, even if tax GDP ratio, that does not mean I am opposed to increase in tax GDP ratio. I am all in favor of increase in tax. I completely agree that tax GDP ratio is one of the lowest in this part of the world and it must be increased. However, even if tax GDP ratio does not increase, I think there is a substantial amount of fiscal space, around 10 lakh crore rupees, which is around 3.2% of 3.5% of GDP, which can be released by restructuring our debt, by reducing the dependence on borrowing from the commercial banks and the private corporate sector and the insurance companies, and by allowing some borrowing, particularly by the state governments, directly from the Reserve Bank of India at lower interest rate. Because Reserve Bank of India is investing their foreign exchange reserve at 2% rate of return. However, government is borrowing, state governments and central government is borrowing from the private commercial banks and insurance companies at 7 to 8% per annum. So that is putting huge burden of interest payment on the exchequer. So that is one solution I was suggesting. But I definitely agree with you that political will is important. I work very closely with government of Kerala. And government of Kerala, if you look at the state exchequer, the picture would not be clear. In fact, they have delivered most of the responsibilities vis-a-vis primary health and education to the local body governments. And that goes from the state exchequer as a transfer to the local bodies. 26% of their planned budget is getting directly devolved to the local bodies, and they are looking after primary health and education. So if we add those figures up along with state government's direct expenditure on health and education, it is very high. It is much higher as compared to Uttar Pradesh definitely and many other states. So priorities do matter, and priorities have to be brought into the table. I completely agree with your points, but what I was trying to say that even if there is political priority, even if tax GDP ratio for the time being is not increasing, there is this fiscal space which can be utilized by reducing interest payment burden gradually and enhancing expenditure on health and education and infrastructure gradually. So that was my point. But definitely I completely agree with you that tax GDP ratio has to be increased with not even 17.5%. Combined tax GDP ratio has come down to around 16.5%, which Professor Pulin Nayak used to say this Kautilya Rekha of taxation. That is, Kautilya Chanakya apparently suggested 1/6 of the produce. That time it was agrarian economy. 1/6 of the produce should be collected as tax.
16%.
That becomes like that, 16.5% in percentage. So, we are yet to cross the Kautilya Rekha of taxation. However, we must. If we when we talk about European government, in European Union, the average size of the government is 45 to 50% of GDP. And in this part of the world, including central, state and local bodies, the size of the government is around 25 to 26% of GDP. So the effectiveness of government, where government's presence is 1/4 of the economy and where half of the economy is government, would be qualitatively very different. They are not comparable. So that is there. However, at present, at the moment, I want to make it explicit through this presentation that, and I intentionally did not divert. Because of sir's question, I went with the flow and discussed some of the monetary policy things. Thank you, sir. Thank you for your comments.
Senapati.
Pleasure.
Yes.
Yeah, actually, my question is generally somehow different from your context. Actually, the international narration about the India is that in time of COVID, that India has managed very in good manner, that in compared to other countries. But if taking the budget expenses on health in 2019, the expenditure is high than the 2020. Okay, because that was the expenditure on health is minus in 2021, 2020. And at that time, the scourge of this COVID has come up in March 20. So in that situation, how India has managed health in COVID times, I am surprised. Can you, yeah, compare to rest of the world? Because I have compared that the BRICS countries, in BRICS countries, India is lowest, in health expenditure than other countries, even in minus. So how to respond it? Can you, because it is not your context, but I would like to know whether if you have some answer.
No, I think God is there somewhere, because it's really surprising the way our, 70% of our population is poor for all practical purposes. And whatever be the poverty line, official poverty line, etc. But if we go by those norms, $1, $2 in PPP terms, we'll see that 70, even in this new thing, this Prime Minister's Garib Kalyan Anna Yojana, 80 crore people are covered. So that is around 70% of the population. Okay. So the government also acknowledges that 70% of our population is poor. And of course, 2.5% people pay direct taxes. So even if there are 4 family members on an average in each family, so that would count something around 10% of the population. And agricultural reach is not taxed. So if you include them, then it would be hardly 15 to 20% maximum of the population. So 80% population does not even come under the purview of the direct taxation, even if you consider one family member, one earning member per family. So that is the situation of the state of the affairs. Now, on top of that, out-of-pocket expenditure is around 80%, as you were mentioning, and on health. And health expenditure is extremely low in this part of the world. I think there are some traditional medicines, something is there, because of which during COVID time, I don't know, I don't go to but we were doing some field surveys during COVID, mostly telephonic surveys, because it was not possible to go to the field during that time. I surveyed with the help of my friends in 15 states in India, including UP, with the help of Manjur. So we found out that, and 2 places I went physically. So there, what people were doing is, people have some traditional way of treating. If it is not very serious case of COVID, they were taking some ginger and honey and some mulethi and some that way they were seriously, that way they are managing. And
very effective actually.
It is, and they're gargling in that's what salt and so on. Otherwise, health infrastructure is extremely poor in this country, and we don't even understand. Sometimes I went to some remote areas where to understand the health facilities, etc. Now, those of us who live in the cities, we would have panic attacks if we feel how crores of people are living in this country. So without any health facility, within near vicinity, there is no health facility available. But people are living, they know how to live traditionally. I don't know, somewhere, and God must be great.
But death rate would be much higher there if you are not covered with good health facilities. People die, nobody knows.
Yeah, that is also there.
Cannot be noted
That is
also.
also there, yes. And many people had many things. They had to neglect because they had no other way, poor people. But later on, there were some symptoms which caused some heart attack or something, maybe after the
COVID
emergency situation. So that has also happened.
Online questions.
Yeah, anybody there from?
Yes.
Yeah, we have.
I just wanted to know like some technical details, like your like the health budget. So the primary expenditure is done by the states on health and education.
Yes.
So in the last slide you said that there's a lot of government securities with the insurance companies and other commercial banks. So how does the state borrow from these insurance companies and commercial banks, because they are under the regulation of say SEBI or RBI and all that, and how do they what is the channel through which they get? Also, like a lot of the expenditure is done by like local bodies, so it is like the expenditure sharing is decided by the State Finance Commission between the local bodies and the state government. So how does these local bodies also access the funds from these corporate sector and all that for or insurance companies, commercial banks? So I wanted to know.
Yeah, not directly. RBI is the banker of the government also. So all the state governments and the union government, they have a bank account with us. And RBI conducts this borrowing operation on behalf of the governments, be it state government or the union government. So there are primary dealers. They first buy all these your government bonds. I mean, there are three kinds of treasury bills: short term, 1 month, 31 days, or 30 days, 90 days, 3 months, and 364 days. If it is 1 year, then it becomes government bond. The government bonds are also 1 year, 3 years, 5 years maturity, 10 years maturity, that way, long term. Now, these primary dealers, the commercial banks and other insurance companies and this corporate sector, they in the secondary market buy those government bonds from those primary dealers and they hold them. As far as commercial banks are concerned, whatever be their statutory liquidity ratio, according to that, if it is 20%, then 20% of their NDTL they have to hold in terms of government securities. But actually they are holding much more than that, 30% of their NDTL because of lack of demand for credit in the market. Okay. Now these extra they are holding and they are buying because otherwise they have to park back that extra money, extra NDTL with the RBI at reverse repo rate, which is much lower, 4%, let's say. And this return on government bond is 7 to 8%. So that is more lucrative. So that's why they hold extra government bonds and they buy it in the secondary market from the primary dealers. Then, in fact, RBI, interestingly, in the secondary market, when after 2008 Lehman Brothers collapse in September 2008, suddenly call money market rate of interest shoot up to 21%. That time there was a panic and there was a apparent liquidity crunch. To infuse extra liquidity, RBI repurchased some of the government bonds from the secondary market in order to inject liquidity. When they are purchasing bonds, they are supplying back money, domestic currency. So that way extra liquidity gets into circulation. So that's the mechanism
So
through
the
which
state government can borrow or
not directly.
on the behalf of
RBI borrows on behalf of the state governments and the central governments. And local bodies, some municipal bonds, etc., have been floated very recently, but mostly they receive the money either from the state government or some schemes are there where central government directly transfers some money to the local bodies. So that way local bodies are getting money as transfer either from the higher tier of the government, either from the central government or mostly from the state governments. So that's the online. Online.
So it is it comes out of the budget of health and education of the central government, whatever the local bodies are spending on health and education.
Yes,
it is,
that should be added in order to understand the total spending.
These bodies, they buy from the primary dealers.
Yes.
The rate is fixed or it's a negotiable?
They say that it is market determined, depends on the demand and supply of governments. However, whatever is supplied that gets demanded because of the unwritten understanding between the RBI and the primary dealers I was talking about.
So generally, who are the primary dealers?
There is a list of primary dealers. There are some 8 to 10 primary dealers. They do the.
Okay, anybody from the Shishika you want?
Yeah. You have given us the picture of the interest components, that it is very high and all that. And in between that, a comment came from our director that is high because of the past borrowing. So, and I'm not like very well convinced with it. So I want a confirmation from you. What is happening on the borrowing front in the last, say, 15 years? Is it increasing? And is there a way to know where are these new borrowings going?
Okay, I mean, government exchequer is a common pool. There are inflows and outflows. So nothing is earmarked. It is difficult to say that this much borrowing has been earmarked for spending on education or health or infrastructure or XYZ, security or police or so on. But it is a common pool. So whatever is the gap between the revenue and the expenditure is being borrowed. That's it. And yeah, your vis-a-vis your first question, what was that?
No, Shivshika is confused. What you said,
Yeah.
the
What is happening on the borrowing front? Is it increasing, or over the last 15 years, has it increased tremendously or not? That's what I want to know.
Yeah, so stock and flow. When we talk about past debt, that is accumulated debt over the years. Every year there are some current borrowings and it has been accumulated over past years. Now, whatever 30% for the state government and overall it is 60% of GDP or whatever it is, 80% I was talking about, which for the developed countries, it on an average, it is 120% of GDP and so on. So that has been accumulated over the years. Every year, the fiscal deficit that is being incurred, that gets accumulated, that is being borrowed. So that is the flow component. That is every year, the first difference of debt, that is the debt this year minus the debt of last year, is the fiscal deficit of this year. So that way, it goes on accumulated, the debt. But the interest payment is applied on the stock, not only on the flow. Because whatever is my current borrowing, I have to, of course, pay interest on that. But I also have to pay interest on the past liabilities. So that accumulated liabilities is on the rise. That's the cause of concern. However, I did one work for when I was working in an IPFP. Manjur was mentioning that for Kelkar Subs Commission, for 13th Finance Commission, and they use that number also, 68% debt to GDP ratio, etc. What happens is, when our GDP growth rate is high, the debt to GDP ratio would automatically come down. When our GDP growth rate is low, debt to GDP ratio is likely to go up. Because the numerator would grow at a lower rate than the denominator in case of high growth of GDP. So if we can ensure higher growth rate, that would automatically bring down all your ratios, because as proportion of GDP. So we wrote one paper also for economic modeling, that fiscal consolidation with high growth. So what we tried to argue is, not only because of ratio thing, but also when growth rate is high, revenue as a function of GDP is also higher. So if revenue goes up, then obviously fiscal deficit would be relatively less. And fiscal deficit to GDP ratio, since GDP is also growing at a fast rate, that rate would also come down. And if that comes down, then accumulated debt to GDP ratio would also come down. So it's basically Domar condition.
Now, let me also clarify. The debt GDP ratio of the central government has increased by 10 percentage points during last 10 years. It is now around 60% of GDP. And if you take the debt of the states, it went up to 90%. And IMF has drawn attention to this fact that this ratio is high and it should be brought down. In fact, it was said that central government borrowing should be not more than 40% of GDP, but at present they are 60%. So there is increasing reliance on borrowing to finance government expenditure. I think that was the question of
Dr.
Shilpika.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Shivshika, what he said, the primary deficit, difference between fiscal deficit and primary deficit. So what I said, if there is no interest payment, then fiscal deficit and primary deficit will be equal, will be same.
Yes.
So, and the fiscal deficit is basically, primary deficit is very negligible. So it is a past borrowing for which we have to pay interest. That is what we were talking.
Sir, Javed was hand raised.
Yeah, Javed.
Hello, good afternoon. Actually, I have heard Shujit Da and Professor A.K. Singh sir. So my question is basically, like if we see the main proposal of the current union budget, so large of emphasis have been given to make India a Viksit Bharat. And there is a, like contradiction that since we are not able to spend much on human resource development and large of the population is depending on the PM Garib Kalyan Yojana. So how this contradiction can be, like highlighted among the, like common people that this, like package is being sold very easily and people are buying it. So it is a, like a very unfortunate thing that we need to discuss it. So thank you so much, like for your presentation. And it's a good discussion, like very useful discussion.
Javed, you know that better than me, so you are in a better position to comment on that. However, I would like to ask Professor Singh if he can kindly respond. I am thinking about this point for quite some time, that in a privately funded political system that we have, for doing politics, be it any political organization or any party, I am not talking about any particular party. For doing politics, we need money. Where from the money come? Who would invest? Why would they invest? Now, if we don't give tax relief, that's why probably political will is lacking behind increasing the tax compliance. Possibly, we are giving some kind of tax relief informally so that they contribute in the party fund by which the privately funded polity is run. So that is open secret, everybody knows. That's how, yes. No, not only through electoral bonds, but even at local level. If somebody has to do politics, they have to give some assurance that, okay, if you don't pay, I'll see that you don't get into jail. So some kind of social security is given. I think this political funding is being extracted from the system in this manner, which is basically evaded tax, which is taking the form of political rent, which Mustaq Khan says political rent.
No, not only tax, all your 80 crore people being given free food.
Yes.
This is all election gimmicks.
That is kind of subsidy side, but I'm saying
You
this.
pay subsidy, but on the other hand, you say we have reduced 25 crore.
Yes.
So now we have only some 13, 14 crore people below poverty line.
Yes.
But you keep giving 80 crore people free food.
Yes.
Why are you giving that 30, 40 crore who has car,
Yes.
but they cannot afford 20 rupees per kg wheat from the market?
Correct.
So this money
Right.
can be used for human development. No?
Absolutely.
That is where the problem is.
In fact, my thing is that probably I am not saying whether it is good or bad. I am saying that there could be two models. One in which there is absolutely zero evasion of tax. I have checked both direct tax rates and indirect tax rates of the whole world. Our tax rates are not less. Our tax rates are not one of the highest, but somewhere in the middle.
Yeah.
But our tax to GDP ratio or tax compliance is abysmally low. And that to a great extent, I think, because of, as Sir was pointing out, because of lack of political will. Now, that political will does not come because the politicians know that if they become too strict about collecting tax, then they cannot do politics. So I think this is one kind of system. Another kind of system can be government funded elections. Then there will be no tax evasion. The tax money would come into the exchequer. Government expenditure would also rise, but behind election, conducting election and so on. So that is another model. Now, which one would be preferable? I don't know. However, I think in this kind of system, possibly the biggest, what should I say, biggest constraint of increasing tax compliance is this privately funded political system. I wanted to ask Professor Singh that, I mean, because of his experience and all, I have just started thinking. So, that what do you think, sir?
You see, the people, businessmen fund all the parties.
Yes.
Same person is funding opposition also, but to a smaller extent. And he gives a larger amount to the ruling party. So the benefit, then he derives benefit through other measures. By getting contracts, by getting, say, charge of new airports, shipyards, and so on. So in decision making, the government favors those who are near to them and finance them more.
Right.
Not so much through tax system, but through direct economic benefit in decision making.
Right, sir. So you are suggesting that politicians in this kind of a system would not be reluctant in increasing the tax compliance.
No, tax compliance has improved to some extent due to this digital economy.
Right.
But we don't find any particular focus of increasing compliance either at a state level or at central level. State government officials say that in trade tax or GST now, the evasion is almost 50%.
Right.
They know this, but there is no will to realize this or to effectively implement the tax laws.
Yeah.
Surajit, I was looking at the
Sir.
tax compliance data.
Yes, sir.
If you see income tax, direct income tax, out of our almost 130, 140 crore population, you say 90 crore is almost around 90 crore, the number of adults.
Yes.
Out of this total population, how much population is paying tax, income tax, is around 2 crore, which is roughly 2.5%
Yes.
of the total population.
Yes.
Now, I was looking at the developed countries, the ratio is 55 to 60%.
Yes.
Some European countries, it ranges 45, 47, 50, 55, 60%. One or two European countries, 65, 70% also in the North Europe, Sweden and all that. 75% people population is paying tax. Now, the problem in our country, the public also has to be little, we don't have any morality. You earn lakhs and crores. There, the people also have the feeling of what we are contributing to the nation. That feeling is missing. Not only in India, it's mostly all our South Asian, Indian continental, it is much more. If we go to East Asia, probably it is better. But here, South Asian, almost all those countries, similar kind of what we can grab from the government, but what we can give. So you have car, but you are, and at the top of this, because of the digitization and all that, they have brought changes. Out of these 2.5 crore, I think 1.3 crore, they are filing taxes. They are filing returns. 1.3 crore filing returns, zero tax.
Yes.
The 5%, 10% increase is among those who are filing returns, but not paying any tax.
Yes.
And you are out of the total 2.5%, up to 5 lakh, less than 10 lakh, is the major chunk.
Right.
Around 0.3, 0.4% people are there who are paying above 10 lakh, who are paying the huge amount. That 0.4% total contribution is around 60, 70%. The other is only 30%. And the major chunk is who is filing returns but not paying any tax. That is the kind of situation. It's an alarming situation.
Yes.
Sir, my understanding is different.
People say
Yeah.
agriculture is kept out of tax. Probably they also need to pay. But huge business class.
Right.
Number of cars. If you see the growth rate of cars.
GST is also increased, no?
Indirect tax is separate. That every country, everywhere people are paying. Do you think those who are paying 75% are paying income tax? They are not paying indirect tax. They are paying indirect tax.
They are paying. What?
The problem is we only say because we are being looted. Why should we pay? If a clerk is paying almost 60, 40, 50, 60,000 tax now. How many people are there in business who are above earning much more than clerk? Nobody is paying. It's a personal responsibility.
Business class is actually, you are questioning the morality of the people in South Asia.
Yeah.
What I am thinking, that actually you are saying that the major chunk of the people, they are not paying tax because they don't have income. No, because
that is
in
what,
India,
that is
the lower income,
look at the wealth.
lower
Look at the wealth, compare it with 20 years back. Hardly there was any landline phone also in the house. Now all facilities are there. It's not that they are not wealthy. They have become much more wealthier.
That is demonstration effect, not the income and all.
I think, sir, in fact, what he is saying, tax base is low.
Yeah.
That is also true. And what you are saying, morally, ethically also, we are not. But I think on top of that, there is another point, which is we guys cannot evade tax. We are, because
only those who cannot evade.
Yeah, but the thing is, I think in Europe, they say that paying tax is inevitable as death. And if somebody is caught without paying tax,
Penalty is very high.
penalty means their life is gone. Here nothing happens.
Rules also have to be much.
Here it is smartness. It is considered to be smartness if you can evade some tax. And yeah,
yeah, Shilpika, you want to say?
No, I'm just saying that it is only the salaried people who are paying the actual tax. All
what I'm
things
saying.
are grossly
That's
under
what I'm saying.
their income. And there are CAs and people who specialize in helping you to underreport your income and evade taxes. So definitely, I mean, if the penalty is not very high, as you're saying, then people would consider it as smartness, and people are considering it as smartness.
No, but like a country like Japan, they have the national feeling also. That is also missing. You have to accept that.
I accept that, but on top of that, this is also there.
National
have, but national cultures are different.
That there is no penalty, as he is saying. That in fact, it is unfair to those who are actually paying honestly.
No, you tell me.
Yeah.
You tell me what happened. 3-4 years back, they changed the traffic rules.
Yes.
For red light, even a scooter was caught for 24,000 rupees of fine. You made those taxes, all those penalties. Where is that gone? Everything is gone with the wind.
Yeah.
By just imposing making a law, I don't think it will be effective. It has to be, you have to find the ways how to apply the laws.
Absolutely.
And that basic, this thing is not there among citizens in our country.
Chujita, one more question.
Yeah,
that taxes, like can be increased from the corporate taxes. So recently we have seen that there is not much emphasis on increasing the, we can say like more new taxes, inheritance taxes, or like other areas, including corporate tax. So I think that has to be discussed.
Yes,
Government is favoring them.
Yes, wealth tax, property inheritance tax, even the direct taxes, as well as profit tax, corporate profit tax. There are a lot of rooms for improvement. Even personal income tax, there are a lot of evasions.
And I don't know.
And under deportings.
Is it true that income tax contribution is more than the GST contribution? Despite this too low, 2% people paying tax, still the amount is more than the GST. The people give the argument that we are paying GST. It's only 2% who are paying, and it is more than the GST.
Sir, because you know that one practical example I have seen, that one builder, I gone to him. One builder, he was saying that I have 4 companies. That means he's building the building. That means that those builders, मतलब मिस्त्री वगैरह वो उनका एक company है. Okay, so supplying another company and making another company. So they have fragmented that company into 4 to 5 pieces, so that to evade the GST. This type of chalaki they are doing.
No, aggregate, if we see tax, यदि 2-2.5% जो है जितना पे कर रहा है, उतना आपका indirect tax से भी उतना ही आ रहा है. At the most 5%, 7% population is paying the aggregate amount of tax. The rest, entire population is not paying anything. So if we can increase it to 25%, we have so much resources for our other sectors to take care.
So government is not doing anything.
That concludes, I think,
It all boils down to the will of the government and reluctance of people.
will of the government as well as will of the people.
Reluctance of the people to pay taxes.
Just by framing law also, I don't think that would be enough when people have to come forward also.
I think the key lies in tax administration, the efficiency of tax collecting authority, the tax information network of the government, which is improving because of internet and all this. Even recently, we have suggested Kerala government to distribute POS machines to the local shops with a SIM card attached to their mother computer. So that Kerala is probably would be the first state to implement that.
Point of sale.
Australia, yeah. Australia and New Zealand, they have already done it. And many other developed countries, they are distributing those POS machines. They cost nothing, but a lot of tax revenues can come. At least information can come. So tax information network, in fact, we can suggest to UP government also to do this.
People will pay and not pay to.
No, but
How
at least
how it functions?
you distribute those machines to all the retailers, and like Paytm, they have to enter or barcode or whatever, this barcode reading thing.
Yeah.
And then some information there, then also there will be a lot of evasions, but it may reduce to some extent. I mean, there are best practices elsewhere. So we can try, there's no harm in trying, and random checks and some punishments and some, all those things may help. However, tax administration and also degree of corruption has to be reduced. That is linked, I think, with this privately funded political system that we have in this country.
And probably it can improve if the government it becomes compulsory at the part of the government to tell me where my money is being spent. I pay 10 lakh rupees tax in a year.
Yes.
Where that amount has been gone, where it is spent, then probably that will encourage many more people to pay tax, because we don't know.
Government will not do that now, because their
biggest fear in
the
mind is it will all go for winning elections.
Yeah.
Then why should I pay tax?
Common pool is a bliss, and it's also it's also, you know, it's a black box.
Yeah, it's a black box, really. So I think with that black box, we
Black paper from white paper to black.
this lecture. I think we have spent enough time and
Thank you so much.
final word by our colleague on the vote of thanks.
Very nice discussion.
Manjur.
Yeah, thank you so much. I have to thanks a lot to in terms of quality as well, because we were thinking that we'll wind up in 1.5 hours, and we just right now past 5. So it shows the interest. But before thanking people, I just like to request Dr. Das, I mean, you have a lot of data, and if you can write something for us, if our director permits. I'm just jumping the gun,
we can publish at a working paper.
Yeah, I mean, it just randomly come to my mind, and I just suggested. I don't know.
We are going to also start a policy brief.
Yeah.
So this kind of contribution in policy brief.
So I think that would be a very good, learning material for those who are working on this policy thing, including me. Okay, so that was one request, and of course I would like to thank you on very short notice that you have accepted this task to enhance our understanding on where is the paisa kahan hai actually. So that is a paheli for most of us when you go to the government and government say the paisa nahi hai jo hai. It's a common understanding that hum isme paisa kharch nahi kar sakte, paisa hai nahi. So that is one enigma that you have solved right now for us, that paisa kahan hai. So and I must say that before the presentation I was really excited, but after the discussions it left me with more and excitement is there to go on this on this topic. So thank you so much for such a wonderful presentation, sir. Thank and I'm really thankful to my director, Professor Pramod Kumar sir, whose interest in academic is really, par excellence, and which gives shapes to our academic actions like this. So I'm really thankful to you, sir, for this thing, sir. Thank you, sir. And our faculty whose participation in this meeting, it's really a great encouragement to organize such academic activities in this GIDS campus. And a special thanks to our former director AK Singh Saab, whose guidance we take as a blessing for our academic actions, sir. Thank you so much for your gracious presence, sir. Thank you so much, sir.
Inputs.
And for the input, also the recognizing the presence of our participants offline and online, and if we able to unite the academic interest around such topic. It seems that if you look at the initial, it looks like a very dry subject, but look, जब पैसा आता है ना तो start thinking यार कि it's a really nice topic to work upon.
पैसा कहाँ आया?
पैसा आएगा कहाँ से?
पैसा कहाँ से आएगा? So I think it's, if any of our present whoever are present here to take interest into this kind of a topic, and it will be really a great success for this
Everybody is most welcome.
yeah. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you.